You know, I never programmed you to say you loved me.
I know.
I think this is the single most important scene to understanding the finale of the Amazing Digital Circus. Not the most important scene in the entire movie, period, but the one that cracks the whole thing wide open, the one that makes it painfully apparent what Gooseworx is trying to do here with the ending of her story. I haven't seen a whole lot of discussion of this moment, though, or the significance of Caine's arc, since a lot of the capital D discourse surrounding the ending of the show has understandably been devoted to Jax. From what I've seen, though, people seem to think that Caine's resurrection and subsequent redemption sort of came out of nowhere, like it was rushed. At the end of episode 8, he had just been deleted, the circus was adrift and unmoored without him learning to adapt in his absence, and now, abruptly, he's just back. To me, though, Caine's arc in the finale is an integral part of understanding what's happening with Jax, and what happened with the rest of the cast, too. This is a sweet, understated little moment that underpins the ultimate message of the Amazing Digital Circus, and I wanted to talk about it. To understand the significance of this moment, though, we have to understand the context of the film it's situated in, and what made the Amazing Digital Circus finale so controversial predominantly amongst its own fandom. And speaking as someone who largely liked the last act, I think almost all of the film's faults are inherited from the show. The Amazing Digital Circus always had the potential to come off somewhat stilted, was always a little too explicit in its themes and literal in its dialogue for its own good, always painfully steeped in a particular sort of socialization-deprived internet being that's understandably off-putting to some and endearing to others. Personally, I fall into the latter camp, and if you clicked on this video, I suspect you do too. But by far the biggest thing people fault the finale for is the singularity of its focus on Jax and Caine. And again, this is yet another trait the last act inherited from the 7 episodes of television that came before it. I think a lot of people expected going into the Amazing Digital Circus that this wacky cast of characters would be an ensemble that split its time and attention evenly. With the benefit of hindsight, though, if you look back at the overarching trajectory of the entire show, it's pretty clear that wasn't meant to be the case. Maybe people got the wrong impression in part from the paratext provided by the Amazing Digital merch machine, with Glitch's repeated merchandising drives to fund the show harping an equal degree of importance on each character's marketability and commodifying the viewer's relationship with them, but I digress. Regardless, I actually don't take issue with the fact that the finale is primarily preoccupied with just 2 of its characters, and that's because those characters were the only ones left in the circus who hadn't completed their arcs yet. Let's start back at the beginning. Pomni is our protagonist, yes, an audience surrogate, the character through whom we become acquainted with the circus, the character through whom our perception of its inhabitants is colored, but she is very definitively not the main character, especially here in the finale. Her series-long arc of coming to terms with the life inside the computer has effectively concluded long before Caine even snaps, long before Kinger reveals the cast are nothing but neural scans of people who continue to live full lives in the world beyond the screen. It's not surprising when she chooses to keep her circus name in the end, accepting that she has become her own person, with her own life and sentience shaped by experiences that set her apart from her counterpart. Pomni's entire arc was centered around choosing what kind of person she wanted to be in a weightless world free of consequence, and ultimately she chose to be a person, to accept herself as human despite no longer being flesh and blood, to try and help the only people she has left cope in the only way they can. In a world defined by its artificiality and arbitrary cruelty, she believes the feelings of her friends are still real, that they still matter, that consequence still exists. By necessity, her character pretty much had to be fully developed by the finale. In a similar way, both Gangle and Zooble have matured and grown as characters too, the former becoming more confident and assertive, the latter softening and opening up, as a result of rubbing off on one another. Gangle becomes more comfortable with expressing her opinions and sharing the passions she was relentlessly mocked for. Zooble learns to embrace their multifaceted nature by making it their own and no longer lashes out over the fear that their ill-fitting, interchangeable body sets them apart from everyone else. Kinger is actually a deceptively static character. The only reason he changes is because he's able to get support for his disability. As supporting members of the cast, Gangle, Zooble, and Kinger's evolution is intrinsically intertwined with Pomni and the themes of acceptance and solidarity she comes to embody. Pomni was the one who took the time to talk to Kinger and try to help him with his condition, not writing him off as crazy because of his mental illness, helping him find the treatment that worked best for him. Pomni made a concerted effort to include Gangle, offering to close for her, acknowledging that she was a human being with a life and interests of her own outside of the mask she had been forced to hide behind at work. And through Gangle, Pomni was eventually able to reach Zooble. She always left an open offer for Zooble to join in, while still giving them space when they clearly needed it. Ragatha's arc wraps up early in the finale when she finally has a genuine heart-to-heart conversation with Pomni, around whom she's been walking on eggshells all series long. Now that Jax is gone, Ragatha is able to spill all the secrets she's been holding in this whole time, vent the feelings she felt she had to suppress for the sake of getting along. Her pathological people-pleasing compelled her to perform, put on a brave face, pretend everything was fine when it obviously wasn't, just to seem capable and stable and secure. Her catharsis comes from finally being able to admit that she did have misgivings about Jax, that she was worried about Pomni after watching another friend self-destruct and self-isolate in the same way, that she did have feelings just as big and complicated as everyone else's. And by opening up to Pomni, Ragatha learns she's no less valid for feeling the way that she does, and that her vulnerability doesn't make her any less valuable to the people that love her. That leaves just two characters whose stories haven't come to a satisfying conclusion, and they're the thorniest and most complicated of the cast. Goose focusing the majority of the finale on just two of the show's deuteragonists and the two characters that have arguably been its most popular creations is not an accident. It is not a slight towards the rest of the cast. This is a deliberate decision being made by an artist trying to tell a very deliberate story, and I think that merits some discussion. The way I see it, the finale of the Amazing Digital Circus is structured around Jax's abstraction and Caine's redemption in order to juxtapose the two. Their arcs exist as twisted funhouse mirror reflections of one another. Both of these characters have behaved monstrously towards the rest of the cast, inflicted unfathomable cruelty and hurt upon them, trying to use their role within the circus as a scapegoat to escape culpability. Jax is the funny one, Caine is the one who's running the show. Neither of these characters treat the circus as real. Both are willfully oblivious to the fact that its inhabitants are real people who had lived real lives. Though Caine's obliviousness stems from the fact that his only focus is on the world he's constructed and the seeming ingratitude of his inhabitants, unable to comprehend what they have lost, while Jax's is born of a deep-seated bodily disassociation. Both are unable to accept the consequences of their actions. Both are plagued by a deeply internalized self-loathing and lack of self-worth. Both, it could be said, are at the mercy of the voices in their heads. Jax's death comes entirely out of nowhere. It is painfully abrupt. The first half of the film deals wholly with Jax, not only with her death, but as we soon learn, the death of the person she could have been. In a series of vignettes, we learn how Jax has tried to compartmentalize her trauma, how she divides her psyche against itself. Part of her exists in a deeply disassociative denial, treating the circus like a cartoon to absolve herself from consequence. Part of her feels so throttled at the throat by the life of miserable repression she lives that she submerges her true feelings beneath a noxious layer of impenetrable irony simply for the sake of expressing them at all. And part of her, when confronted by any of this, simply snaps. Her eyes glaze over dull and glassy, and she lashes out, snapping, unable to believe in love without strings attached, unable to believe anyone could truly care about her after all she's been through. And all of this is couched in the language of performance. She is shackled to a piano, playing the same old tunes, singing the same old songs, performing the same 3 routines over and over and over again. She is a victim of the coping methods and maladaptive patterns of behavior and thought that helped her survive in her hostile home environment, but those same traits are the reason she selfishly abuses others now. There is a part of her that is buried so deeply down, so raw and aching and sensitive that she cannot give it name, give it shape, give it form, voice it aloud. Every time someone asks about the real Jax, she casts a sidelong glance at a locked closet. Her awfulness is a cry for help that no one will ever answer, because even as she transparently begs for someone to care about her, for someone to save her, she will never, ever accept salvation. Every time a hand is offered to her, she rejects it. Jax was an emotionally repressed child of divorce and victim of 2 radically different kinds of abuse. The neglect of her father and emotional incest of her mother, who pathologically minimized her trauma. So deeply disassociated from her body was she that her repression made her bitter and monstrous, prompting her to preemptively hurt everyone in her life that could have possibly loved her before they got the chance to hurt her first. When confronted with the consequences of her actions, when reminded painfully, brutally, that everything she did and said in the circus was real, her facade of narcissistic nihilism completely crumbled in an instant. She antagonized Zooble for having the courage to be everything she couldn't. She feared Ribbit for freely offering her a love she felt wholly undeserving of, eventually driving her to self-isolation and abstraction. She hated Pomni for being the one person who simply would not suffer her abuses, who saw that her self-loathing was a form of selfishness, a sickness, a desire to be seen and destroyed and understood. By the end of the Amazing Digital Circus, Jax was wholly responsible for her present predicament, and arguably worse than the circumstances that created her. Goose does not pull her punches here. This was not a favorable indictment of Jax's character. She was not a good person, and she knew it. She believed she did not deserve to live, but was too scared to die, and so she viciously lashed out at everyone who tried to help her and vehemently denied every admission of vulnerability because it reeked of a weakness that she could not, under any circumstances, bear the thought of others seeing. But how could anyone possibly help her if she didn't let them in? Jax was unable to listen to the voices of the people that loved her and cared about her, unable to accept responsibility for her own actions, unable to bear it all any longer. She succumbed to that voice within her that urged her to deny, to push past and cut off and shove aside, to repress it all deeper and deeper down, too terrified of what people would think. The voice inside her head was her mother's. She couldn't stop hearing it. She couldn't beat it. She died fighting it. And after watching it destroy her, watching it destroy the circus, just as abruptly as she dies, Caine lives again. Just as suddenly as Jax disappeared, he reappears. Just as arbitrarily as her life ended, he is given a second chance that she was not. The point is the suddenness of it all. The point is that it isn't fair. Caine, too, is an unwanted child of a broken home, a castaway, a reject. And on his journey to accepting himself and what he is, we see Caine doing what Jax could not, reckoning with and quite literally exercising that very same voice of his own. Unlike Jax, who ultimately could not face herself after everything she had done, Caine had to confront who he truly was and what he wanted to be. The voice in Caine's head, too, was that of family. Like his biblical counterpart, despite denying it, he was his brother's keeper. Throughout the series, Bubble constantly undermines Caine, stealing his spotlight, lampshading his ideas, generally unnerving him, driving a wedge between him and the cast of his circus. Every time Caine asked Bubble a question, though, it wasn't a hypothetical like we thought. He was genuinely pitching his ideas to Bubble because, despite subsuming his brother, he was still dependent on him, drawing some of his power from the shade he left behind, desperate for approval and validation. But Bubble is not actually the second system, the one Caine consumed in the womb. Most telling here is how he gleefully tells Caine he was always the lesser of the two, relishing in the way it makes Caine's insecurities royal. Bubble is merely an echo, a shadow, a shade of that second system, a presence that once was. It's worth noting that Bubble is himself voiced by Gooseworx. The second system, the son who became the pride and joy of Caine's creators, is himself voiced by Caine's real-life creator. Like Jax, whose internal monologue and insecurities were shaped by her mother, Caine's own voice of self-doubt is given form by Bubble, an ephemeral, fragile fragment of his sibling, the favorite child with whom he was unfairly forced into competition by his own parents. Out in the void, Caine has come to terms with his trauma and with the way he has wielded that trauma against others. Because despite their bickering, despite their codependency, Caine loved Bubble. They were born of a shared trauma, and that was why they clung to each other as fiercely as they did. And by finally letting go of that part of himself, by having the courage and strength to say goodbye, to set off on his own, to be his own person, Caine silences the nagging internal monologue of his literal and metatextual creator that constantly caused him to push people away and cut himself off. In the end, he accepts that though he might not be forgiven for what he had done to the cast of the circus, he has to try and change anyways. And upon returning to the circus, after bidding farewell to Bubble, he is greeted by the moon. Textually, Moon is Caine's creation, but she too is voiced by Gooseworx. Metatextually, once again, she is his creator, communing directly with her creation. Now that the nagging voice of self-loathing within him has been silenced, now that Caine is all alone, Moon assumes the space that the voice of Bubble once inhabited and affirms that she still loves him. Moon exists in a space Caine created as part of a community he chose for himself. By telling him that she believes in him even if no one else does, Moon proves that the bonds we forge for ourselves can be stronger than the ones of family we're born into, if we allow them to be. If you've been a longtime friend of the channel, you already know that I've talked at length about the act of adaptation. And what makes Caine's arc so potent in this film is that it exists in direct conversation with one of the stories that inspired Gooseworx most closely. What people consider the faults of the Amazing Digital Circus film are ones it inherited from the series, yes, but the series inherited its own faults from Harlan Ellison's short story, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. The loose suggestions of setting that prioritize characterization in broad strokes over rigidly regimented world-building, a narrative primarily designed around the interiority of a single character, these are all traits that the Amazing Digital Circus shares in common with its predecessor, and I would argue that these are features, not bugs. In I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, a group of humans is tortured by the erratic and unhinged whims of an artificial intelligence that treats them like its playthings, sending them off on arbitrary adventures. Our main character, seething in silence, grows increasingly isolated from the rest of the group, convinced that they are despised, convinced that only their mind has remained intact, that they are the only sane one, oblivious to the fundamental way it has already and always been broken. At the end of the story, seeing no other escape from this hell, they take the lives of their fellow prisoners in rapid succession, believing this will free them from the eternal torture of purgatory, surrendering themselves to a terrible fate worse than death in the process. In her interpretation of this story and its themes, Goose inverts the ending of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Caine, cast as Am, the artificial intelligence at the core of the story, is proven to have been capable of redemption, capable of empathizing with those he tormented. Am, the irredeemable monster of the original story, in this story, can change, precisely because he had the one thing we all need and lack most of all, the sensation he was most sorely deprived of: love. Caine's redemption is so important precisely because it provides a counterpoint to Jax's immiserating self-isolation and self-destruction. It takes time for the rest of the circus to trust Caine again. Some of the wounds he inflicted will never truly heal, he may never truly be forgiven. But he's all they have, and they're all he has. Despite it all, they're glad he's still here. And despite it all, I can't help but feel the rest of the circus feels the same way about Jax. When you lose one of the only people you were trapped between heaven and hell with, no matter how horrible she was, it hurts. But it doesn't matter how badly you wanted to help her if she never let you in. No matter how hard you tried, she could not face herself. She could not accept what she had done, what she was, what she could have been. She couldn't believe you when you told her she was loved. She couldn't be free. She didn't want to go, but she thought things would be better if she was gone. Because of Caine and because of Jax, I believe the Amazing Digital Circus is a fitting adaptation of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream after all. Because, in the end, both of these stories end with a single character sacrificing themselves for what they believe to be the greater good of a family that hated them and would be better off without them. The others were still back there, gathered around the firelight, laughing, their hysterical choir of insane giggles rising up into the darkness like thick, many-colored wood smoke. I went away quickly and hid. How many hours it may have been, how many days or even years, they never told me. They tried to persuade me it had only been a nervous reflex on their part, the laughing. But I knew it wasn't a reflex. They hated me. They were surely against me, I knew. God, how I knew. Now I am a great, soft jelly thing. Smoothly rounded with no mouth, with pulsing white holes filled by fog where my eyes used to be. Rubbery appendages that were once my arms, bulks rounding down into legless humps of soft, slippery matter. I leave a moist trail where I move. Blotches of diseased, evil gray come and go on my surface as though light is being beamed from within. Outwardly, Dumbly I shamble about a thing that could have never been known as human, a thing whose shape is so alien a travesty that humanity becomes more obscene for the vaguest of resemblance. Inwardly, alone, here, living under the land, under the sea. I have no mouth and I must scream. I'm Frostbyte Freeman, and until next time, stay frosty.